Listen carefully and allow yourself to settle into this moment, because there is no rush here, and there is nothing you need to prove to anyone while you're listening. This message is not meant to overwhelm you or excite you. It is meant to clarify what you have already been sensing in the quiet corners of your days. If your life feels quieter than it used to, if your circle has grown smaller, if your inner world feels deeper but more solitary, there is nothing wrong with you. You are not behind, you are not failing, and you are not being forgotten. You are moving through a phase that many never understand, a phase where growth no longer happens through noise, applause, or constant motion, but through stillness and precision. This is not the absence of life. This is life reorganizing itself around what truly matters, cutting away what was loud but hollow, and keeping only what is real. And the reason it can feel unsettling is because you are trained to measure progress by activity, by validation, by being seen, by being surrounded, and by being needed. But there comes a point where your soul stops negotiating for attention and starts demanding alignment. That is what this is. You are being refined. You are being simplified. You are being separated from distractions that once felt like connection. Some people mistake this season as punishment, but it is not punishment. It is protection and it is preparation. When your circle shrinks, it is not always rejection. Sometimes it is clearance, room being made in your life for what can actually hold your next level. When conversations start feeling shallow, it is not that you have become arrogant. It is that your spirit is no longer entertained by what drains you. When you feel the urge to step back, to observe, to move carefully, it is not fear. It is wisdom, turning the volume down so you can hear what has been trying to guide you the whole time. Because in this phase, the noise fades, and your intuition speaks louder. The old habits that once comforted you start feeling heavy. The old environments start feeling cramped. The old versions of you start feeling like clothes you outgrew. And yes, it can be lonely, because transitions are lonely, especially when you're becoming someone your past cannot recognize. But loneliness is not always a sign that something is missing. Sometimes it is a sign that something is being removed on purpose. You are being taught to stand without leaning, to breathe without approval, to be steady without an audience. So now let us go deeper, slowly, clearly, and without distraction. Do not fight the quiet. Do not rush to replace what is left, and do not chase stimulation just to feel normal again. Let the stillness finish its work. Let clarity rise. Let your life rearrange itself. This is the part where you stop being pulled in every direction and start being anchored. This is the part where you become harder to manipulate, harder to confuse, and harder to derail. And when the next door opens, you will walk through it with a cleaner mind, a calmer spirit, and a stronger sense of who you are, not because the world got louder, but because you finally learned how to listen. Point 1. Why seasons of solitude are often divine preparation. Solitude is often misunderstood because most people associate growth with movement, visibility, noise, and constant interaction. Yet real transformation does not occur in crowded spaces where attention is fragmented and identity is reinforced by external validation. It happens in stillness when distractions are stripped away and awareness turns inward. When your life begins to quiet down, it is rarely a punishment or a loss. It is usually a signal that your inner world has become more layered, more discerning, and more awake. You are no longer satisfied by surface-level conversations, recycled opinions, or repetitive emotional patterns that once filled time without feeding meaning. What used to entertain you now feels hollow. What once demanded urgency now feels oddly irrelevant. This shift is not random, and it is not accidental. It emerges when your values mature and your nervous system no longer craves constant stimulation to feel alive. Solitude creates the conditions where you can finally hear your own thoughts without interference, where your intuition speaks without being drowned out by noise. It allows unresolved emotions to rise to the surface, not to overwhelm you, but to be acknowledged, integrated, and released rather than suppressed. In this quiet, you begin to see patterns, how you react under pressure, why you choose certain paths, where your energy leaks and where it strengthens. Many people fear solitude because it removes their distractions and forces them to sit with who they are, without filters, roles, or performance. But if you are here, it means you have the capacity for that encounter. It means you are strong enough to observe yourself honestly without collapsing or escaping. Preparation is rarely dramatic or visible. It is subtle, internal, and often uncomfortable, but it is also deliberate and exact. This season is not about isolating you from the world or shrinking your life. It is about refining your direction, clarifying your standards, and stabilizing your inner foundation before you re-enter with precision. When you return, you will not move the same way, speak the same way, or tolerate the same things. You will engage from alignment rather than impulse, from clarity rather than confusion. Solitude is not the absence of progress. It is the calibration phase that ensures when you move again, you move with purpose. Point 2. Why negative influence no longer affects you the same way. There was a time when external opinions carried significant weight, when a single comment could echo in your thoughts for days, and a minor situation could quietly dismantle your emotional balance. A passing interaction had the power to shift your entire internal climate, not because it was important, but because you had not yet built a stable internal reference point. Back then, your nervous system was constantly scanning the outside world for cues, signals, and approval, trying to determine whether you were safe, valued, or aligned. But something has changed, and the change is subtle enough that most people miss it. You still notice negativity when it appears, but it no longer embeds itself inside you. You observe it without resistance, process it without drama, and then continue forward without carrying its weight. This is not emotional numbness or detachment from life. It is emotional regulation in its mature form. You have learned, often through repeated exposure and quiet endurance, that not every thought deserves your attention, and not every feeling requires immediate action. You understand now that reactions are optional, not automatic. This shift signals deep psychological grounding. Your nervous system has become more stable because it no longer interprets every stimulus as a threat. Your sense of identity is no longer built on reflection from others, but anchored internally. When outside influence stops penetrating deeply, it is not because you have hardened yourself, but because you have strengthened your core. You are no longer checking the external world to confirm who you are, what you are worth, or where you stand. You already know. This stability did not come from avoiding hardship or insulating yourself from discomfort. It came from meeting difficulty directly, again and again, until it stopped defining you. You faced uncertainty, tension, and misunderstanding enough times that they lost their authority over your inner state. What once felt overwhelming is now familiar, and familiarity breeds composure. This is what emotional maturity looks like in real life. It is not loud confidence or performative strength. It is quiet strength that does not need to announce itself, a steady presence that does not rush to defend, and a calm response that comes from knowing you can withstand what arises without losing yourself. Point 3. Why some people feel distant without explanation. As you grow, relationships naturally change, not because anyone is wrong, but because alignment shifts at a level deeper than words or actions. Some connections were formed around shared habits, shared routines, shared environments, or shared versions of who you used to be. And when your inner world evolves, those structures quietly stop fitting the same way. You may notice conversations that once flowed now feel forced, laughter that once came easily now feels delayed, or silence appearing where comfort once lived. This can be confusing, especially when there was no argument, no betrayal, and no clear ending point to explain the distance. But growth rarely announces itself with dramatic exits or loud conclusions. More often it works silently, creating subtle space where closeness once existed. That space is not a mistake, and it is not meant to be rushed to fill with explanations, apologies, or forced effort. It is meant to be observed. It is meant to teach you discernment, the quiet skill of recognizing which connections support your expansion and which ones unconsciously pull you back into older versions of yourself. Discernment does not require blame, resentment, or superiority. It requires honesty with yourself about how you feel during and after interactions, about whether a relationship leaves you energized or depleted, clear or confused, grounded or restless. Distance in this phase is not rejection, and it is not abandonment. It is respect for timing, for seasons unfolding at different speeds, and for paths that may diverge without hostility. When you allow relationships to evolve naturally, instead of forcing them to remain the same, you release emotional tension and prevent imbalance. You stop performing familiarity out of obligation and start honoring authenticity instead. This allows both people to continue growing without resistance, without guilt, and without the pressure to explain changes that are internal and gradual. Some connections will soften but remain warm, others will fade gently without bitterness, and a few may realign later in ways you cannot yet see. None of this means you have failed at connection. It means you are learning to let life move with you rather than against you. Growth refines your social world, just as it refines your inner one. And the space it creates is not emptiness, but clarity. Point 4. Why your life feels quieter than before. A quieter life often signals a shift from reaction to intention, a moment when you realize that not everything deserves a response and not every sound deserves your attention. You are no longer pulled in every direction by urgency, expectation, or the invisible pressure to keep up. Instead, you begin choosing where your energy goes, deliberately and with care. This choice often looks like withdrawal from unnecessary noise, fewer conversations that drain you, and fewer commitments that exist only out of habit. You may spend more time alone, more time thinking, and more time reflecting, not because you are disconnected from life, but because you are finally listening to it. This is not disengagement. It is discernment. You are learning the difference between what is loud and what is meaningful. Noise is not the same as purpose, and constant activity is not the same as fulfillment. When your life slows down, your awareness sharpens. You begin to notice subtleties you once rushed past, patterns in your behavior, motives behind your decisions, and the emotional cost of choices you once made automatically. Your thoughts become clearer because they are no longer constantly interrupted. Your priorities quietly reorganize themselves without force. What once felt urgent loses its grip, and what truly matters begins to surface on its own. You stop chasing stimulation and start valuing depth, substance, and coherence. This quieter phase creates space for integration. Lessons learned during chaotic seasons finally settle into understanding instead of remaining scattered memories. Experiences that once felt overwhelming are no longer emotionally charged. They become sources of insight, context, and wisdom. You no longer need to relive them to prove survival. You have already integrated the meaning. Stillness, in this sense, is not stagnation or retreat. It is consolidation. It is the phase where growth becomes embodied rather than theoretical, where you stop talking about change and start living from it. In quiet, your nervous system recalibrates, your identity stabilizes, and your actions become aligned rather than reactive. You move with less friction because you are no longer fighting yourself. This is not the absence of life. It is life distilled, focused, and finally under your command. Point 5. Why your heart had to release certain attachments. Attachment is often mistaken for connection, but they are not the same thing, and confusing them can quietly shape the direction of your entire life. Attachment, especially when rooted in fear, insecurity, or emotional dependency, asks you to hold tightly to people, roles, or identities as if they are life rafts. Connection, on the other hand, allows closeness without fear of loss. As you evolve internally, your nervous system begins to reject what once felt familiar but limiting. You may notice relationships thinning, old versions of yourself feeling uncomfortable, and roles you once relied on starting to feel heavy. This moment can feel like loss, not because something valuable is being taken from you, but because something outdated is being released. Letting go does not invalidate the past. It honors it. Every connection you formed served a purpose at the time it entered your life. Some taught you love, some taught you boundaries, and some taught you exactly what you no longer wish to carry. Holding on beyond that lesson creates inner tension, a quiet resistance that drains energy and clouds clarity. When you release what no longer aligns, you are not abandoning love, you are refining it. Space opens inside you where honesty can breathe. You begin to act from truth rather than obligation. Emotional independence grows not as a wall, but as a steady center. You start to experience connection without clinging, presence without anxiety, and care without self-erasure. Your sense of self stabilizes because it no longer depends on being needed, approved of, or constantly affirmed. The heart becomes lighter, not because it feels less, but because it is no longer carrying excess weight. Flexibility replaces rigidity. Resilience replaces fear. This release is not about becoming distant, cold, or indifferent. It is about balance. You learn to value people without possessing them, to stay close without controlling outcomes, and to love without negotiating your own integrity. In this space, relationships become cleaner, more conscious, and more aligned. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity. And from that clarity, genuine connection finally becomes possible. Point 6. Why your path remains steady despite challenges. Challenges do not disappear when you grow. They simply change their texture, and more importantly, they change how you meet them. You still face uncertainty, still walk into moments where the outcome is unclear, and still encounter setbacks that would once have shaken your sense of direction. The difference now is internal. You no longer interpret difficulty as a personal failure or as evidence that you are lost. You respond with patience instead of panic, and observation instead of emotion. When something doesn't work, you adjust rather than collapse. This steadiness is not accidental. It is the result of self-trust, earned through experience. You have learned that discomfort is temporary, that confusion is often a doorway rather than a dead end, and that clarity usually arrives after you stop forcing it. You understand that growth is not linear, that progress moves in cycles, pauses, and recalibrations. Because of this, you remain grounded even when outcomes are uncertain. You stop rushing solutions and start allowing resolution to emerge through consistent, deliberate action. This calm persistence becomes your advantage. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation. It simply works, quietly reshaping situations over time. It is one of the most powerful traits a person can develop, not because it is loud, but because it is reliable. Point 7. What comes after this protective season? Preparation always leads somewhere. This quieter, more inward-focused phase is not the end. It is a foundation. As clarity solidifies, you will begin to re-engage with the world differently. You will move with intention rather than urgency. Your actions will feel aligned rather than forced. You will contribute from a place of stability rather than seeking approval. This does not mean life will suddenly become loud or dramatic. It means your involvement will be meaningful. You will recognize opportunities that match your values. You will engage in relationships that respect your boundaries. You will trust your timing rather than comparing yourself to others. This is what integration looks like. Growth expressed naturally, without strain. If your life feels quiet now, honor it. Stillness is not absence. It is alignment taking shape.